I'm Christy Picard, and I'm the mayor for New Baden. Tonight, we have the pleasure of being able to interview all of the mayoral candidates that are going to be up for election in April. I am so excited about this, and I want to say a few thank yous to the people that have made this possible. First, Tom and Patty Murdoch have put a lot of time and effort into getting this organized, and we really appreciate that. I really want to thank the candidates for taking their time and coming to answer the questions tonight. This will really help the residents get to know you better and be able to make some informed votes in April. And then last but certainly not least, I want to thank the residents here in New Baden for participating and submitting questions. Your involvement in this election is critical as we go forward. So we all really appreciate your involvement in this. So now I just want to explain how this is going to be done a little bit for tonight. So we have the questions broke out into 5 different categories. The first category is a general category, and then we're going to talk about public safety, fiscal responsibility, infrastructure, community. And then there's going to be a moment where I'll be able to ask the candidates specific questions that were asked to them that were provided by the residents of New Baden. And then finally, we'll allow each of the candidates to make a closing statement. So again, thank you to everybody that was involved for making this possible, and I look forward to hearing the candidates' response. Thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and start with the general section of the questions tonight. The first question is, leadership skills are essential for a mayor to be successful. To that end, we have a 3-part question related to leadership. The first question is, how do you define leadership?
So leadership is I define it as influencing others. Sometimes it's a bad influence, sometimes it's a positive influence, but either way, it's an influence. But then there's also within that transactional leadership and transformational leadership. Transactional would be your day-to-day managerial type of style, whereas transformational is what truly inspires people. Those are the leaders that you remember for years to come. They're the ones that set the culture, define where you're going to go, and set that and create that vision for, in our case, the village, or in a business case, where they're going to bring the company into the future.
Great. And what do you think are your strongest leadership skills?
It'd probably be getting to know people on a personal level. I feel like once you get to know someone on a personal level, you're more able to lead them where they need to go by using their strengths and weaknesses to kind of work for the common good, where you plan on going in the future. So by getting to know like our constituents on that personal level, what their personal needs are, you're able to kind of move the village in a way that works for the greater good, and you're not you're trying to include as many people as you can in those initiatives.
Sounds great. Now, is there an area of leadership that you feel like you need to strengthen?
Communication is probably one of my areas, just because I kind of get tunnel visioned whenever you're working with a problem, or you almost forget that there's another person there. It's that whole squeaky wheel gets the grease type of situation. So if you're not having, so I just forget that someone might not need my attention, and if they're going fine, and whenever they might need that attention.
Okay, that sounds great. In addition to leadership, what do you believe are other required traits of being the mayor of New Baden, and how does your experience make you qualified for the position?
The role of the mayor is really to help bring that unity in the village, having that almost human resources type of feeling, being able to work with others, not only that you get along with, but those that you don't get along with, in order to complete the common goal. And part of that is having the responsibility of bringing about the information that all groups need and bridging that gap between whether it's different committees, the residents and the board, but being that bridge between the different groups, so that way everyone is working for a unified front and able to, really promote the growth of the village.
Okay. What steps would you take to ensure that all pertinent information is presented in a non-biased, understandable manner so that the elected trustees can make informed decisions?
A lot of that's going to be working with the staff and, reaching out to the board members, especially for some certain agenda items that may have more weight put on them than others. So our staff they're our day-to-day professionals. We rely on them heavily, but we also have to think about not only what their wants and needs are, but does that fit with the wants and needs of our residents and the fiscal or the financial stability of the village and being able to showcase that. I used to work in research and development. In R&D, you might expect something to happen. You want something to happen, but it doesn't happen. But you can't be biased towards that. So you have to be able to present the full picture, the full information, so that everyone is making that informed decision. And where one group of people might agree with you, another group of people may not, you still need to present that information to them so that everyone is making the best decision with the information that they have at the time.
Okay, Taylor, what do you feel are the biggest concerns for New Baden, both at the present moment and in the future? And how will you go about addressing these critical issues?
So what I feel is our first biggest is kind of the foundation. It's our infrastructure. Our infrastructure is aging. It's fallen apart, to say the least. We have many clay, especially when it comes to sanitary sewers. We have many clay sanitary sewers that have become that have eroded over time. So we need to take the steps in order to address these issues underground. We may not see them. We all see the stormwater and the runoff and the flooding issues, but it's not until your basement's back up with raw sewage that becomes an issue to us. But we need to be proactive with comprehensive planning, utilizing our engineering firms to help us develop these plans and determine where we need to go in the future. And that also, to me, that's secondary to growth, because if we do not have the infrastructure to help us move along or to support the growth, then there's no point, because in the end we're all gonna be feeling the effects of that. Now that doesn't mean that we don't need commercial growth. We do need to support commercial growth. That's how we create a larger tax base to take off the burden of our residents. We have great access with Interstate 64. We have economic programs with our TIF districts, our business district. We have monies in those in order to help support and foster these new businesses. So it's kind of a twofold thing. You have to balance economic or growth and our infrastructure at the same time, but we have to put one first. And in my opinion, the infrastructure, in order to support that growth, is going to be our top priority.
Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and move on to public safety. So how would you support the New Baden Police Department in keeping the village of New Baden and our officers safe?
So I would use the recommendations of not only our chief, but as well as the officers themselves to determine exactly what their needs are. We have many new tools with technology. For instance, Chief Mack was able to secure some grants for that license plate reader out by Love's, and we were able to make an arrest of a suspected murderer about a month ago. So by utilizing technology and promoting, training. That's the foundation of where we need to be. And this may even include, hiring additional officers whenever the time comes, and just being able to listen to our officers on what they need, because some of them may not feel comfortable sharing their thoughts with their leadership. So, you need to be able to be a mayor. A good mayor needs to be able to be open and accessible to those officers so that they can provide those thoughts to them.
Okay, great. You mentioned training in your last answer. The next question is actually, what are your thoughts on officer training, and do you think diversity training needs to be required?
Okay. So proper tools and training are needed in any industry, not just the village or any sort of municipality, but in any business, and it's the foundation of what gets us going. So our current chief, he, whenever he came in, he's a big proponent of training and additional training. He stated that during his interview, and I think that's something that we all want for our officers. Not just the mandated trainings, the state mandated trainings, but as well as extra training such as the FBI Academy, or being able to investigate sexual assaults. Having those tools and abilities can be really beneficial. And for cultural training, we absolutely need cultural training. With our location being as close as it is to Scott Air Force Base, Interstate 64, it's not just the people that live in this town that they're interacting with. It's the people that are visiting town, going through, just passing by either on the interstate. So they interact with those individuals. So by promoting that cultural training, they're able to better assist them. And that goes along too with being able to work with people with maybe some mental disorders, and how to handle those situations so that our officers are kept safe, as well as the individual that they're interacting with.
Thank you. With the New Baden Fire Protection District operating as a separate entity, how do you plan to increase continuity between the village and the New Baden Fire Department?
So both my dad and my grandpa were on the fire department. They were both firefighters for many years. So I have a great relationship with those individuals, with firefighters, with the board. So I want to be able to work with what works for both of us. Their district lines don't go much outside of the village. So their tax base is essentially our tax base. So we need to make decisions that work both financially and socially for both groups. Our current public safety building is the same size as it was 30 years ago, whereas the town is not. And so we've experienced those interactions between the two groups where problems have occurred, just mainly around the space that's there. So we need to work and work with the district and work with the village to determine what will kind of promote that space and utilize what we have, and perhaps that means in the future someone moves out. So that's where I think that I can utilize my relationships with them to really help foster the growth and the change that we need.
Okay, we're going to move on to fiscal responsibility. All of the mayoral candidates have had experiences as New Baden trustees. What has been your specific history related to tax-related voting?
So while I'm not in favor of raising taxes, however, it's a necessary evil sometimes. So in the past, the board did not want to raise taxes. They were adamantly against it. However, what that resulted in was essentially neglect in our maintenance, having underfunded funds, and now we're paying for it. So this last tax levy, I voted yes, and it was a unanimous yes vote to increase that. That was solely driven by our need to fund as this applies to the levy before that as well, to fund our needs that are state mandated for audits, IMRF, Social Security. And so while we don't want to do that, that provides us with a solid tax base, or a solid funding source, that to be able to ensure that we're able to fund those state mandated funds.
Okay. And then if elected, what steps would you take to put our city on a firmer financial footing?
First, we need to find what efficiencies we have. Where can we find efficiencies? In my opinion, we underutilize technology for the village. Not just within, we administratively, I feel like we're pretty good, but especially when it comes to public works, and even some of the areas of the police department and EMS, we can use technology more, need to use technology more to promote efficiencies, find these efficiencies, take advantage of them, so that way, maybe we don't need to hire that extra person to do a job. We can use technology to do it, because they don't have benefits, they don't have wages. So while there might be an annual cost to it, it's usually pretty steady. Second is we need to find revenue sources outside of our tax base. We just had a public safety meeting the other night looking at, can we do some sort of a transport service with our second ambulance to increase the funding without having to increase revenues? And can we do that in other areas? Can we utilize our parks, such as like our park and civic center, more to more or less self-fund those funds, rather than utilizing tax money to fund those attributes to the village? And then finally, be commercial development. So, we need to promote our commercial development, as I stated earlier, by utilizing our proximity to Interstate 64 with our TIF districts and business districts to create incentives for them. And that it's a twofold thing. We can reduce the tax burden on the residents from a property tax standpoint, tax levy, but then it can also, depending on the type of business that comes in, provide us with sales tax revenues that we can then utilize to grow the village or fund these larger projects that we need to complete.
We've talked a lot about growth of New Baden. How do you plan to ensure that our local businesses are continued to be supported while we go through that growth?
So one way that we can do this is through publications. We have our New Baden newsletter. We could highlight these a particular business every month, but it's almost like a free advertising for them. We have a lot of businesses here in town that people may not know that they even exist, especially new to our area. While they may see, a business such as Spaith Welding, they may not think that they can go there and get their needs met, because it's a very commercial and industrial site. So they may not think, I can just walk up there and see if he can and make this for me. So I think by highlighting these businesses and maybe kind of bringing more light to what they can do and provide for the residents, I think that would really help promote them, just by educating them, or by educating our residents. And again, with our TIF and business districts, those businesses that are located within those districts, those funds are there for them. We can, not just new growth, but we can, if they have projects that they want to perform that fit within those funds, we can help them out however we can with funding through that. So I think that by just promoting the ones that we have through advertising, and then helping where we can financially through our different economic development funds, I think that would be the greatest way.
Okay, thanks, Taylor. Okay, we're going to move on to infrastructure. Suppose you were approached with a new public infrastructure proposal. How would you evaluate whether the project was worth implementing?
First, we need to look at our capital improvement fund. We need to determine where that project would fit into that. Is it in our plans? Is the fund able to handle the load? And is it something that we truly need? We need to be able to ensure that we get all the data that we can, as much data as possible, to determine that it will benefit the residents in this way, or this is a lot of money for something that's only going to benefit a couple. So whereas we don't want to minimize what a project because of how many people it affects, we have to do that from a financial standpoint. When we also need to look at other avenues for funding it. Our wastewater treatment facility is probably the greatest example of that. We spend a lot of money out there, it's a multi-million-dollar facility that has a 0% interest loan on it through the EPA, and we're able to use those other types of sources for funding to to help grow New Baden and keep that growth going in the future. So while we may not have the funds immediately available, we can look at those avenues.
Okay. What do you see as New Baden's top infrastructure improvement projects, and what would be the steps you would take to assure they are addressed?
The top infrastructure would be, as I stated earlier, the underground development, underground issues, and not just in our sanitary sewers, but we have water lines that are over 50 years old. We have above ground or below ground storm sewers that we have had issues with in the past. And those we can't just send someone out. You can't just send a public works guy out to say, hey, go look at this flooding. You have to really dig into those. So just as we just got our sewer lines televised to inform us as to those problems. So by utilizing tools such as that, engineering tools, and kind of other ways to look into those problems, we can make a plan and create a comprehensive plan so that we don't do something in one area and it messes up another one to the point that now we have to spend a bunch of money there on a Band-Aid fix because we fixed another area. So comprehensive planning is going to be a huge need for our growth, for fixing those problems and ensuring that they don't continue into the future.
What specific steps would you take to support or improve the residents' involvement in critical decisions affecting New Baden residents?
So for the last 2 years, I have been trying to get the agendas out there more often, so in more avenues. So the village itself does what it needs to from a legal standpoint of posting the agendas on the doors and on the website. But our resident involvement really wasn't where I felt I wanted it to be. We got very few residents come, or people would say, well, I didn't know this was happening. So I started sharing the agendas on our local community page to try and promote, hey, this is what we're doing. This is where we're going to be talking about tonight, and ensuring that more information was shared and we're more transparent with our actions. And I'll continue to do that. Another way I think we can continue, or we can promote our residents' involvement is, with the pandemic, our meetings went fully remote, which isn't always ideal, but it also allowed those that maybe couldn't get off work at a certain time, or have 2 kids at home that they just can't commit to attending a meeting, they were still able to call in. So I think we need to continue that so that these residents that maybe have their own life situations can call in and still participate from home. I think part of that is also going to be a little reworking up here at Village Hall with microphones and maybe even a camera that can be put up, so that way we can have those remote call-ins of residents that want to call in from home. And then for those important votes, or what we deem are bigger and more important votes, as we have in the past, we'd like to delay that vote by a meeting or so that way we can publish our plans in the New Baden News. We can ensure that the local newspapers and media are able to publish their stories thoroughly enough that the residents are truly informed as to what the decision is that we are going to have to make, and are able to participate in those decisions.
Okay, the last question under community is diversity and inclusion and belonging are increasingly important topics. If anything, what would you do to improve race relations in our village?
So, one way that we can do this is simply through education. Our youth are the ones that by changing a person when they're young, are helping them see where the social views are when they're young. So diversity benefits every village and business. And I think if we promote groups, promote educational opportunities for individuals. For instance, so I used to be on the U of I Extension Board. That's one thing that U of I Extension does, is they help promote these educational opportunities. They really strive to serve underserved populations. So we can work with U of I Extension to use the programs maybe that they already have in place. We already fund Extension with our tax dollars, or with our county tax dollars. So why not allow them to come in, help us with our programs, and develop programs to, more or less create inclusion and education, not just with the youth, but with our adult learners as well, and adult programs.
Thanks. We're going to go ahead and move into the individual questions now. These questions were submitted, and they were submitted directly to you. And so we're going to go ahead and go through those. So the first one is, do you see yourself as someone who works well with others? If so, describe a specific situation where this occurred.
So I do see myself as someone that works well with others. Where I experience this the most is on the finance committee. So the finance committee touches every part of the village, whether it's public works, EMS, administrative, and police department. We have to be able to work with those department heads, especially in whenever we're trying to create a budget, and we're like, hey, this project isn't going to work, or we need to find a different way to fund this. So I've done a lot with working, especially with on this EMS proposal, working with Alan and creating, utilizing my education and my skill set to develop projections and try and figure out, is this the best avenue that we can take? While the numbers may seem good on one end, do they really provide us with the net gains that we need to shore up those funds and promote where we need to go in the future with our public safety department?
You've had a few people who mentioned that they were not a fan of your vote against the new establishment wooden mouth that's going in. Please help us understand your reasoning behind that decision.
So I want to make sure that it's clear to the residents that I did not vote against a business. I voted against the increasing of our tavern liquor licenses during a pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected all of us, whether it's been direct or indirect, whether you've had it or not. So I personally had it, and I had very few effects. However, I just had a customer today come in, and we were discussing it, and he said he's known 4 people that have died from it. So it hits everyone in different ways, and I just didn't feel that promoting or creating an environment that promoted the congregating of individuals during this pandemic was the best idea. My wife is a healthcare worker herself, and the way that she works at a hospital where they're being overrun by patients from COVID. Having her describe how these people suffered and ended up passing was brutal, and I don't want that on anyone. And so I made the decision to vote against increasing the liquor licenses at that point, and I made sure that I stated it was at I don't agree with this at this time. It's not that I don't I didn't agree with it ever. I voted yes on the previous application to increase the liquor licenses a couple years ago. So I'm not anti-business. I haven't been anti-business, and I've been labeled as such as a result of that vote. But I want to ensure that the residents know that that was my reasoning. That was the reasoning I stated that evening of the vote, and I truly feel that way, and I still feel that way. Now we're coming out of the pandemic. This is becoming a better time. So, if that vote were to come up today, would it be different? Most likely. The pandemic's winding. We have vaccinations, but at that point in time, with the data we were provided, I felt that was the best decision I could make.
And then the last question is, do you feel your age and/or experience will be an obstacle for you during the election, or if you are elected mayor?
No, I don't. As the saying goes, you're only as old as you feel, and where I may be a young age, a lot of times, not just physically, but mentally, I feel a lot older than what I am. So I don't think it'll be an obstacle. I think by utilizing my youth and my kind of drive to promote the village and move the village where I see it, or where it's best for the residents. So I'm in a situation where in 50 years I'll probably still be around to feel the effects of those decisions. If I'm not, my kids will be. So I need to remember that in all my works is how will this affect the village in 50 years? Because I'm gonna have to deal with it. So I think it's a strong it should be a strong attribute. I'm not set in my ways. I'm able to easily take in the viewpoints of others and ensure that we make the decisions that are truly for the future of the town.
And then thank you so much, Taylor. We're giving each of the candidates an opportunity at the end here to make a closing statement and maybe address anything that we didn't ask you tonight.
I have 2 young children at home myself, and I need to be thinking about them whenever I think about the decisions for my town. I was born and raised in this town. My dad was born and raised in this town, and my kids were born and will be raised in this town. And I want them to want to stay in New Baden. I've wanted to stay in New Baden. I want them to want to stay in New Baden. So I have to remember that in all of my decision making. So while being mayor is a lot, it's very it's a lot of work. It's quite taxing. I'm just completing my MBA right now. I've been working with staying up until 11 o'clock every night or later, and having to make those sacrifices for that. So in my viewpoint, the mayor's role will fill in on my educational role, or what my educational role has been taking this to this point. I think with my education that I have and my experience of working with others and working well with others, I feel that I would be the best candidate for a role as mayor. And I hope the residents really look into the information that we have, participate in our local government, so that we get their input as well. I want that input. I want our residents to truly love the village that they live in. And finally, I just want to thank my wife and kids. So my wife's put up with a lot over the last several years with me being on the board, and especially with this campaign. And so I've had to make a lot of sacrifices that she's had to pick up. So I just wanted to thank my wife and kids for really supporting me throughout this entire process.